Welcome to the Soul Touched by Dogs podcast, the show for dog lovers who see dogs not as toys or tools, but wise souls worth our respect and care. I'm Anke Herman, and I'm your host. I talk to awesome humans, people who do great work for dogs and their people. So come and join us for today's conversation. Hello and welcome, Peggy. I'm super excited to have you here.
Well, thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here.
And we're just saying we need to give a shout out to Kathy for the introduction. I'm pretty sure she'll be listening. So before we dive into our very juicy topic, let people know where you're based and what's your business with dogs.
Oh, well, thank you for asking. I am actually based in two places. So I'm currently in Virginia, but I also have a home in Florida, and that's where my law office is located. So I bounce back and forth between the two states. And meanwhile, my 8 dogs are living in Virginia, along with my cat and my 4 horses and my husband. So how
In
I
that
got
order, right?
right, exactly. Always been a huge pet lover. I think I was not even a year old when I asked for my first horse, but didn't get horses until I was 10, but I've always been surrounded by dogs and cats and just a huge animal lover from the get-go.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So now I always love it, specifically when passions merge, right? So, because that sounds to me like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels to me that's what you did when you start talking about pet trusts.
Absolutely. So I had this desire, as a lot of people do, to write a book. And so I didn't know what I was going to write on. And I had been practicing law in the areas of wills, trusts, and estates for a long time. And I was brainstorming with a friend, and he said, well, you should write about pet trusts because that's something that you love. And it was exactly the right advice. And so I wrote a book about planning for your pets, making sure that our pets have a safe and forever home in the event that something happens to us. Either we pass away or we become disabled. I think the mistake we make as pet owners is we always think that we're going to outlive our pets. And that's not always true. And especially if you're a pet lover, we tend to get more pets as the ones we lose pass away. We tend to replenish that because we have that hole in our heart that can only be filled by the love of another dog.
So true. Isn't that so true? And I mean, I've certainly had that sense. It's like, well, I don't really care if I die, that's all right, you know. It's just like, oh my God, what happens to the dogs, right? And yeah, funny, actually, a friend of mine around the corner, she's got 6 dogs. And then she'll sometimes look after others. So but there's like, yeah, one just passed. And so there's this, well, we're not going to get any more dogs. Well, unless there's somebody like, unless there's one in real need, you know. So it's like, yeah, I wouldn't put my hand anywhere to, you know. So there's a good chance that she'll have another dog. So that's, yeah. And I think there'll always be one that looks at you, you know. So it does make sense. But can you unpack like what it means to have a pet trust?
Sure, absolutely. So people are used to maybe thinking about trusts for themselves, for their children, for people who might have special needs, but we tend to forget about our pets. And we have this idea that if something happens to us, that just miraculously our family or our friends are going to step forward and volunteer to take on this responsibility that we made a commitment to. And yet we know that that's not really true because hundreds of, literally thousands of animals end up euthanized in animal shelters annually because their pet parents didn't have a plan for what was going to happen to them. So I started thinking about this topic in depth. And in the United States, all 50 states and the District of Columbia have statutes that permit the creation of a pet the creation of a trust for the benefit of a pet, where the pet is the beneficiary. Historically, you couldn't have a non-human as the beneficiary of a trust. But with the change in the laws, that really opened the door for people to be able to do planning for their pets. And the thing that I always talk to people about is, these are the really important things, is figure out who you trust to take care of your pets on a short-term basis, and then figure out who you trust to take care of your pets on a long-term basis. And it might be the same people, but I want people to think through both of those, because it might not be the same people. And we want to make sure that if the people we've chosen are either unable or unwilling to serve at that time, that we have some alternate sources. So I like to go 3 deep if we can. And sometimes people aren't enough, and we have to pick organizations as our final choice. So that's really where we get started, Anka.
Oh, that makes so much sense. Now, the interesting piece is I heard pet trust, and my first thing was my mind went like, okay, so you basically save up money for that. Is money a
So
part of it, or but not the primary part, as from what I understand you just sharing?
So you're right. I mean, it is definitely part of it, because if somebody left you their 4 dogs, it might be nice if they also left you some money for their care. So we all know how much it costs to take care of our animals, and that's not necessarily a responsibility we would want to put on somebody else without providing some assistance in the form of financial assistance. So thinking about how much money you want to leave for the benefit of your pets is also really, really important. And I think that traditionally people underfund how much they should leave for their pets. And what I try to get people to think about is, how much do you spend to take care of your pets now? Figure that out to be an annual number per animal or per dog, and then multiply that by an extraordinarily long lifetime. So if you think your dog's going to live for 15 years, I say assume they're going to live to be 20, so that you have that cushion built in. And that way, if there's an emergency or if there's a surgery that we didn't count on, we've got those extra funds. And I'd always rather see somebody overfund, so leave too much money than not enough money. And then I like to encourage people to leave whatever's left after the pets have been properly cared for to their favorite animal charity.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Now, I'm also curious about, like, how do you go about, or what do you take into consideration when you choose the people, right? So I'm now thinking like, okay, because you're saying like people you trust, right? That's where for me personally it kind of gets a little difficult, right? Because there's lots of people that I really like and I wouldn't trust with my dogs, right? So so my parents, who I would fully trust with my dogs, yeah, but they're at an age, and so where it's like I can't trust that they'll be there when whatever. So also, like, do you have, like, what does the conversation need to look like, and what's the difference between the short term and the long term care?
So those are really good questions, because number one, we should be having conversations with the people that we choose. We don't want it to be a surprise. Like they get a phone call and go, "Oh, hi, you're now going to be responsible for all of Anka's dogs." And congratulations. Yeah, we want to have that conversation. So sometimes short term just means like, okay, we find out that something's happened to you, and now we've got to make some immediate provisions to take care of the dogs. That could be in a boarding facility, that could be with a pet sitter that you trust, that could come to your house for a period of time. But maybe those aren't the situations where you would want your dogs to reside long term. So let's say your parents don't live near you and we needed to get those animals transported to wherever it is that your parents live. So when you're thinking about a trust is a legal construct, really. So it's a written document that essentially has a couple of parties. It has you as the person who creates the trust maker. It has the trustees, and that would be you during your lifetime, but others in the event of your disability or death. And then for your pets, you've got the short-term and the long-term pet caregivers. and then you've got your remainder beneficiaries. But the trustees are the people that are really doing the oversight for what's going on month to month, year to year with the animals and with the money. So sometimes people want to name the same people as the trustees and the pet caregivers, and that's fine if you really, really trust those people, but you've got the same person providing care who's overseeing the money, and maybe that's not the best decision.
I was just thinking about that. Like, yeah, that's a whole, like, what if somebody goes, "Oh yeah, I'll do it," and then they take the money, go on a holiday, and and don't care for the dogs, right? So that's why there is that other, like in theory, that other person in between who just keeps an eye on making sure that it's actually being acted on as planned.
Exactly. So
Mm.
it just builds in an extra layer of protection. And the example I always give is the one where, let's say that I wanted to leave all of my dogs to my sister Anne, along with a sum of money. If I just make that as an outright distribution, okay, Anne, here's my dogs, here's the money. She could do just exactly as you suggested. She could say, thank you for the money, drop the dogs off at the nearest shelter, and be done with the whole affair. But if I want to make sure that the money's being used for their proper care, I probably shouldn't put her in charge of the money, or I should add a second person as a co-trustee to help facilitate that.
Mm. I mean, in your experience, like do people honor those agreements? Is that like, I'm just sort of like a little bit like, oh God, in Spain, I wouldn't know whether somebody even like, yeah, whatever piece of paper will do.
So I think depending on state law or the law of your jurisdiction, whether or not pet trusts are recognized, there are lots of opportunities to enter into less legal agreements. So maybe just a contract as opposed to a trust. But yes, I think overall people do honor those and recognize them as legally binding agreements. And there's been some litigation though. So as you can imagine, there's a very famous case in the United States involving Leona Helmsley, who was one of the founders of a large hotel chain. And when she died, she left her dog, aptly named Trouble, $13 million. And a judge stepped in and said that he thought that $13 million was too much for a dog. And so they reduced the amount of money that was being left for Trouble's benefit. Couple of things here. Number one, I don't think it was the judge's prerogative to decide what the proper number was. I mean, he exercised that jurisdiction, obviously, but it was Leona Helmsley's money, and she should be able to leave however much she wants for the benefit of her dog. The problem was there were people involved. And so the people were the ones that challenged the trust. Obviously, the dog didn't walk into court and say, hey, I think $13 million is too
Money's
much,
mine.
right? So it was the people that got involved. And so I think you have to balance what you're leaving for the purpose. And that's why I always suggest a charity as the final beneficiary instead of people, because I don't like to give people an incentive to not follow your wishes.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, I don't know how many people usually have who they would trust with their dogs. Like, but I personally, I'm very much like, okay, there is like very few people on this earth who I trust with my dogs, where I'm I would be sure that they're not just capable of taking care of them, but they'd also want them,
Yes.
you know? So because you don't want to throw these people under the bus either, like and just sort of dump that responsibility on them when they've not chosen it. So what kind of organization, when you say, well, okay, as a last resort, when you say, because that also takes the pressure off, like, say, if I have a first level person that I'm thinking like, okay, I'd love you to take care of the dogs, but if they, for some reason, can't do it, or they also feel like they have a bit of a way out, so it's not like, okay, that's your problem now. What kind of because that's the thing, I wouldn't want them to end up in some, you know, shelter or something, right? So it's
Right.
almost like, what kind of organizations, or like who would you suggest to be the, bucket kind of at the end
So
to
there,
catches?
there are lots of animal organizations these days who are developing programs for the long-term care of people's pets. Um, these include rescues, shelters. Some universities, through their veterinary school programs, have started some programs for long-term care for pets. I created an organization called Animal Care Trust USA, just for that purpose, to act as trustee and or to provide permanent placement for animals through a network. There are organizations that we call perpetual care facilities that really, that's what they're designed to do, is to
Wow.
provide this lifetime care. In some instances, it may not be the lifestyle that your pet would be used to, because you want them to maybe live in a more home-like environment. So not going to be a suitable suggestion for everybody. I'm one of those crazy people, Anka, that when I die, I don't want my dogs or my cat or my horses to have to move. I want them to live in my house, and then I want the pet caregiver to come and live at my house and take care of my animals, so that the only thing that's missing is me.
Hmm.
That
They're
their life
still in
really,
there. Oh, I hadn't even thought of that. Yeah.
yeah, so that their life really goes on unchanged, except for who's doing the walking, the cleaning the feed bowls, providing the food, taking them to the vet, doing their, daily care routines. And so it is difficult to find people that you trust, but I challenge people to develop relationships with younger people who really love pets.
Yeah.
A good source are the veterinary technicians that work at your vet's office, because as a general rule, those people are going to be younger, and obviously they love pets, or they wouldn't be working in that role.
That's such a good idea, to even think in that direction, right? To not just sort of scan, like in my mind, I'm sort of scanning my contact book, right? It's like,
Right.
who would I? And I'm like, Jesus, you know, and yeah, but to actually cultivate relationships for that, yeah. Oh well, that makes, and I guess that, you think about, if you have somebody who's studying, well, they'd love to have a place to stay. It's like, yeah.
Right. I
Mm.
had the opportunity to speak at Pet Sitters International, which again is a great organization for people to look to. But I asked the question to the audience, who here would be willing to move into someone else's house if you knew all of the expenses were going to be provided for in order to care for their dogs or their cat or their bunny rabbits or their horses? And I would say more than 50% of the room, their hands shot up.
I'm
Um,
pretty sure. Yeah, I'd be like, yeah. That makes that makes it so much, it feels so much more doable like that. Because that's the thing. It's like, if I'm the only crazy dog person in my family, I'm thinking like, I might not have somebody in my immediate family. Like, if I take my parents, for example, they love dogs and they consciously don't have one because they love traveling more. Even if we took the age out of the equation here, they love my dogs. They wouldn't be keen to have them because then they can't go anywhere, right? So it's a whole different direction to look into, which I think makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, and even you're exactly right. I mean, even if we have people that love our dogs, um, they may not have a lifestyle that would be conducive to providing them with the kind of care that you would want them to have. Maybe they live in an apartment and you want your dogs to live on a piece of property where they have room to run. So you have to take all of those things into consideration. And that's why it's so important too to have those multiple layers of people, because we never know what somebody's circumstances are going to be at that relevant moment in time.
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing I see is to even start thinking in that direction. Like, it's like build that network. It's like when you go on LinkedIn, right? You can't start building a network when you already need a job, right? So
Right.
you need to cultivate those relationships before you need them. And I think it's the same here. So you don't want to like scramble like crazy, like, okay, now I can't take care of my dogs. Well, if I'm dead, then I can't even do anything anymore. And so you need to think about that before you need it.
Absolutely. Well in
Mm.
advance of need. And as a general rule, I think people are really optimistic because we always say, when I win the lottery and if I die. And and so we forget that we really do have to plan for that eventuality when we die. And our things are unimportant, but our pets are living, breathing, loving, sentient beings that we have made a lifetime commitment to. And so we owe it to them to continue that commitment on into the future.
Yeah, no, that makes so much sense. Yeah, because kind of like, oh, yeah, I hadn't even thought of, the house sitter and then also looking at like consciously looking at younger people because yeah, that's the thing. If I look at my parents, well, oh, that's kind of worse, right? So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
so that doesn't and friends that tend to be sort of the same age. So, that's, maximum like that first layer. So you definitely want some younger people in the mix there. That makes
Yeah. So every time you go to the vet, you have to take the vet techs out for lunch, right? Or bring donuts or something to get on their good side and start developing that relationship with these younger people. Or by joining some, animal related clubs or organizations where you might be exposed to folks that have a similar interest.
I love
So
that.
maybe you could enter into an agreement with somebody that says, well, if you take my dogs, I'll take your dogs, right?
Yeah, totally, totally. I was just thinking like, well, I could do that with my friend and then I could easily end up with six more and then I'll
Right.
catch you.
Well, if she leaves you the money, then there you go. Get a bigger place and
Exactly.
you have a happy dog farm.
Totally, totally. I wouldn't mind actually. Yeah, no, that's funny because that's also the other piece. Like, when you think about it, when you think about even when you go on holiday or something, like to kind of find a place to stay for one dog is always one thing, right? But like, what do you do with eight? It's
Right. Well, right. Yeah. So I used to travel from Florida to Virginia with 6 dogs. This is before my farm was ready here in Virginia. And 6 dogs. We had to drive nonstop because I always jokingly said, I don't have any friends who like me enough to let me stay over with 6 dogs, right?
Yeah, no, that's the thing is like you have to, I don't know, like a camper van or something where you can all sleep in it. It's the only way to go, right?
Yeah,
Mm.
that's exactly right. Or if you tried to stay, and we have tried this, staying at like a Airbnb, um, the dogs are out of sorts because they're not in their home environment and they're very nervous. So for us, it just became easier to drive straight through. And the dogs were perfect angels the whole way. They slept most of the time. And here we were driving and driving and driving for hours on end just to make sure that they were not going to be uncomfortable, right?
Yeah. Well, all the stuff we do for our dogs, right?
Right,
So,
exactly.
so if somebody goes, well, hey, that makes sense. I want to start moving some things. I want to get started. I want to find out what's available and possible in my area. So what's a good place for people to go? And where can they
So,
find out about you and get in touch with you and, make those
so
first
lots of
steps?
lots of places to start. So I do have a book called All My Children Wear Fur Coats: How to Leave a Legacy for Your Pet. So there's a lot of really good ideas in the book. Secondarily, if you already have an estate plan, and I hope you do, you have an attorney perhaps that you can talk to who would be aware of the laws in your jurisdiction about planning for pets. but I would caution people to work with people who are pet lovers so that they have that natural inclination to think about what would be best for pets, and then explore the alternatives. Like you said, start developing those relationships and networks with people who are younger that you know to be pet lovers. Use a pet sitter on a regular basis so you can develop that relationship too, so that you have that short-term caregiver at least, right?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, absolutely. We're going to pop the link to the book in the show notes, and make it easy for people to find you. So thank you so much. Like, this was really eye-opening, and I'm thinking, Jesus, like, yeah, we really have to all think about that, because you can't just throw the closest people under the bus when something happens, or leave your dogs unattended. So that's then probably the worst thing that can happen.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to leave it to chance. You want to have a plan. And
Yeah.
I like to say that wishful thinking isn't planning,
Not
right?
a strategy, right? Love that. Well, thank you so much. This was an absolute delight and quite the eye opener, to be honest. Yeah. So definitely some work to do. So thank you. Thank you for filling us in.
You're so welcome. Yeah. Happy planning, right?
Exactly. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review so other dog lovers can find the show. If you haven't already, head over to soultouchedbydogs.com and sign up for weekly doggy cuteness, tips, recommendations, and personal stories to warm your dog-loving heart. And if you know a pawsome human you think I should interview, I'd love an introduction. Email me at Anke, that's ANKE, @soultouchedbydogs.com.